short. So what I'm going to be talking about is how we can use technology to get rid of rats, stoats and possums. So I kind of got into this in a roundabout way. It's really related to the Christchurch earthquake. Had an earthquake, had to spend a bit of time out in Akaroa, ended up moving out there. The real estate agent never told me the house was full of rats and possums. So like every good Kiwi, I just went about doing a bit of trapping. And over the next couple of years, I started noticing that the bird population went up, and I thought, man, that's kind of cool. But then I started digging into the whole thing, and it's really quite embarrassing. New Zealand's the second worst place in the world for species loss and ones that are in danger. It's not because we don't care, it's just that we were our own island for 70 million years, and then they never learned to adapt to these species. So it's really quite embarrassing how bad it is. And as a technologist, I started thinking how we could kind of go about doing this a little bit better than what we do at the moment. So we've talked a little bit today about Moore's Law, how if you use technology, you can get twice as good really quickly. I'll talk a little bit about open source, which is kind of cool. And then we're really about engineering solutions. So I'll show you some stuff that's really quite raw and early stage, but you've got to use your imaginations a little bit. So the first thing I wanted to do is know, is the bird volume getting better? Because at the moment, we do all these projects and there's no objective way to know. So we've got a little app, it just takes a little sound recordings and then we can analyse it with a computer. So our project is called the Cacophony Project because we want to get the cacophony of birdsong back in New Zealand. And obviously a device that measures the cacophony is called a cacophonometer. And when we weaponise it, it'll be called the cacophonator. So that was kind of the first part, and then I started thinking, I wonder how else we could use technology. And so the standard way we use is basically either poison or a mousetrap. And so you put a bit of food out there and you hope that something comes along. So we thought you could use sound lures to mimic social sounds. You could use digital lures, you could use better traps. And what we really found was when we started putting cameras in front of the traps, for probably the first almost year, I kept asking questions of why we were so rubbish at catching things. But it ends up they just don't really catch very well at all. It's actually about 1 in 100 is a typical sort of number of times we'll see an animal and they'll get caught in a standard trap. So the first thing we wanted to do was to make sure that we could see everything that's out there. So we had an idea that a lot of what you can see with a standard cameras, you actually miss, because the cameras that most people use are little trail cameras. They're designed for pigs and deer, and they just don't see fast-moving little mammals. So we started using a heat camera, and you can see it gives, see what the possum left there? It gives quite a different view, but basically we can see about 3 to 5 times as much as we've ever been able to see before. So anyone who tells you anything about predators and what's happening out there, they've kind of missed about 3/4 of what's going on. So that's the first part. And obviously, you don't want to sit there and go through all the videos. So we use artificial intelligence, and that's really just a fancy word of saying pattern recognition. So we now have a tool that what it does is it automatically identifies the different animals. So it can, this is the raw footage here, and then this is what the artificial intelligence is doing. So what you can see here is the bottom number is an instantaneous guess of what it thinks it is, and once it's worked it out, it puts a little number at the top. So you can see that fairly quickly. The interesting thing about this is if you pause it, you'd have no idea, but we do it on the video, so you can see by the movement, you can tell what the different animals are. And some of these animals, you've just never been able to see things like stoats and little rats before. And basically, when you put these cameras out there, they're everywhere. You know, we go and say to people, we'll put a camera here, and they say, oh, nothing ever comes here, but there always is. They're just everywhere. If it was as visual as chopping down forests, we'd be horrified. So that's the first part. And then the next part is, instead of using food as a lure, we use sounds. So the hardest predators to get rid of are the last ones when there's very few or when there's a re-invasion. So when you get that case, there's food everywhere. So what's next on the list after you've got a full belly, a little bit of social interaction. So it looks like if we mimic social sounds, we can lure in these hard-to-get predators. And one of the things I really love this project is people go, hey Grant, what are you working on? And I say, oh, I'm spending quite a lot of time thinking about possum erotica. And it can stop a conversation. So these sound lures can cover a much larger area. They can be very species specific, so we can see what's going past, potentially play a different lure. They can obviously be much longer lasting. You can try lots of different things. And as I mentioned, they're even more efficient for getting rid of the last ones, which is what you really want to do, because if you can do it once and you don't have to do it again, you don't have to just keep doing it over and over again. And then the other interesting one about this is that if potentially you can just get rid of the males or the females, then potentially you actually get rid of the whole lot over time. So there's lots of really interesting things about that. And the thing that I'll show you a little video shortly, the thing that's really cool about it is it can evolve faster than the predators. And so once we can see what's going out there, obviously the next stage is, can we track what's going on? So this is very crude. This is just a little device that's tracking a radio control car with a hot water bottle on top of it. So you can see that we can track, this is what the heat camera thinks it's seen. We haven't trained it on feral radio control cars, so it's not guessing very well. But you can see that, this is actually not very high tech in the whole scale of things, but the reason we're interested in tracking it is lots of the animals don't go towards the traps, and so we want to have a way that we can potentially get rid of them. So obviously the next step is to use a paintball gun. So one of the interesting things about all of our pests is they're all groomers. So we've been told by the folk at Lincoln, if you can get poison on their fur, they will lick it off and they'll die. And we're like, well, we could probably do that. It's quite a fun project, this. There's lots of issues that we've got to go through regulatory to make sure we do this, but this is stuff we drop out of a bucket from a helicopter. So we can be way more targeted than that, and we can make sure that it's safer than any other poison dispensing system at the moment that any kid can go and stick their hand into. They won't be able to with this. You'll have to mimic a rat and you just can't do that. And then it'll be a case of it'll only be able to hit you below the knees, and then it would be too small a dose, and then you'd have to bend down and lick it off. And then you're like, well, maybe Darwin kicks in, I don't know. But before we do that more controversial approach, what we've been playing with, just because we can get going, is something, this is going to look very crude, and this is just what I was talking about doing rapid prototype, but this is a much more open architecture device. Is that? Oh, there you go, it's gone. So what we were noticing is a lot of the times the animals just wouldn't go into the traps. The best ones were these live capture traps. So this one can go into a lot more. So you can trap all sorts of different animals. And then the thing we found that was really interesting is once you catch one, what happens is another one would quite often come along. So you could say, for example, you'd see a rat once or twice a week for 5 weeks, eventually get caught, and then 10 minutes later another one's there, and then 20 minutes later another one's there. So we've now got a version of that catches one, opens up, catches another one. And so we can actually record sounds and do a whole lot of learning with that. And then obviously the next step is quadcopters. So, because anyone who's been in the deepest, darkest bush goes, you could never have these traps going everywhere. But we're working with people at the University of Canterbury that prune trees with quadcopters. Not a chainsaw, a little pruning thing. But this stuff that used to be sci-fi is getting easier and easier. The coolest thing about this whole project, as far as I'm concerned, I worked in tech and I didn't really understand open source, but basically if this is open source and free, anyone can contribute to it and use it. We just figured we're not intelligent enough to know the whole thing, but open source works brilliantly. Like Wikipedia is a great example. Most people kind of forget that the company that put Encyclopedia Britannica out of business was actually Microsoft. They had a little digital Encarta thing, and then 5 years later, the most powerful company in the world closed that business down because of this open free thing. You wouldn't think it would work, but it works wonderfully. And this is actually my favorite video of the whole lot, because what it shows is how people collaborate. So this is showing the first person starting the project, and this is showing all the links of the code that works together. You don't have to worry about what all the little links are, but what it shows is it starts very slowly, and then this guy, Tim, decided to start chipping in just for free. And then what you've got is it's kind of almost a visual representation of how this community of people are using their collective intelligence to take on rats. Now, when people go, wow, it all sounds high-tech and everything, I go, we're just trying to match our wits with rats. It shouldn't be too hard, really. But you can see that as we've got more and more into it and a bit more credibility, it's just kind of starting to explode with more people. There's about 3 people contributed last week that I'd never heard of. It's really cool. You wouldn't think it would work, but open source absolutely rocks. These are some of our great supporters. We wouldn't be able to do it as quickly if they weren't doing that. So the whole thing with, some of the stuff does sound like sci-fi, but if you can make it digital, then it gets half the price or twice as good every 18 months. And so the stuff that sounds impossible, already our cameras are about 200 times faster to analyse predators. They're about 1/10 of the cost of actually analysing predators, and you can see about 5 times as much. So the impossible becomes normal, whereas a rat trap is not going to get twice as good, all the poisons. And so we're in this little phase that you get with exponential, where in the short term, we quite often get asked, how many possums have you caught? And it's bugger all. So you go through this phase where you're developing the technology and you're not really making much progress on the thing. But I think hopefully you've got a bit of a feel that this process is the powerful thing. And as we get there, we're going to get better and better, and it looks promising. We've done a little analysis, and worked out the cost of, we had a device that could get rid of all the predators, and it was $20,000 now, and the rate of technology was half what it has been. And we looked at the cost per hectare of getting rid of predators. Because we don't intuitively understand exponential, we think that predator-free 2050 is actually a crazy goal, and you should be able to do it by 2040. So you can imagine maybe a little device that is maybe the size of my fist that's sitting in the forest, and it's listening for what's out there. So it identifies, gets rid of them, and then you've got a swarm of quadcopters, has lines of these things working through the bush, gets rid of the whole lot. We get rid of them, we get our native bird song back, all of our fauna, and it will be a cacophony of bird song, and you'll want to invest in double glazing for noise control. So that's our project. Thanks for having a listen. Cheers.